Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Well, it brings me great pleasure on International Women's Day, March 8th, when we're recording this for the week of the 11th of March, to bring on an old pal, an old friend, someone who I have great respect for. I first met her in a park in Evanston when she was getting out of Northwestern, and we were up there recruiting to work in Uptown for Joint Community Union, Marilyn Katz. And Marilyn has been so gracious as to agree to come on today. And she has a special event that is taking place that we're going to talk about first. And we're going to talk a little bit about International Women's Day and politics here in the city. So Marilyn, you helped to found Chicago Women Take Action. It's a group you helped spawn. It's hosted many forums, most recently 9 candidates for mayor. And you're about to host another one. Talk a little bit about Chicago Women Take Action.
I have to go back to go forward. So, Michael, when you and I hate to name Tom Mosier were recruiting, I never turned back. And actually, on this National Women's Day, it was, in fact, at Join where I began to understand the position of women. Because, if you'll remember, we were organizing welfare women, and welfare was a women's problem. The fact that women couldn't work or they were paid less, it was very clear that poverty was a women's issue. So yes, and that has continued to be a thread of organizing through my life. Chicago women.
I do remember a lot of times we would take women to the welfare office, and I remember we had demonstrations, and we worked with Kenwood Oakland Community Organization and Latin American Defense Organization, and the women
TWO
coming on us.
Right, and TWO, and you remember in that community where there were a number of very strong Black women on welfare, but also a number of Appalachian women. For the Appalachian women, birth control was a major issue because the men actually used to beat up the Vista workers who were trying to convince women to take birth control. It was so my rooting in women's issues goes back to really to Join. So now this weekend, we have an alliance of 44 women's groups across Chicago, an alliance that started in 2014 and has grown. But you know what, Michael? Our agenda is very much the same as it was at Join. Economic security for women and their families, healthcare, decent housing, clean air, clean food, constraint of the cops. Really, I mean, for better or worse, those issues have not changed over 50 years, for better or worse. However, I really do. This is such an exciting group, much more diverse than any other group in Chicago, because it is an amalgamation of Black Lives Matter and the Women's March and Chicago Women Take Action. And there's a real desire both to have the two candidates answer the questions about our agenda and what they would do, but also to really think about, with a new mayor in City Hall, how do we take that agenda forward and give it legs? And because another caper that you and I did together, we haven't had a women's commission since Harold Washington. So we would like to see that, where you're really addressing wage issues of, a disparate scale for service workers and cafes, which you know very well, versus other workers, et cetera.
Was that something that Harold created, and why did it go away? Why didn't anyone else pick up on it?
Well, there was this real jerk who was, I can't remember his name, and Clarence something or another. There's a lot of trouble with Clarences in the world, and he decided to dissolve it, and that there would just be a human rights commission because all issues were the same. But I really want people Saturday to come to Chicago Temple at Clark and Washington, and you can get those tickets by going to ChicagoWomenTakeActionAlliance.org on the web, and you can find the flyer and get your ticket, or you can go to Eventbrite.
What time is it, Marilyn?
It's from 2 to 4.
That's good because this show airs on Saturday morning. It gets streamed. It'll be on YouTube the night before. I don't know how many people are going to come because of it, but hopefully a few will take the opportunity.
I think it's really important. And if you can't get there, and if there are no more tickets left, it's also being streamed, broadcast live on CAN TV, and also their Facebook page and on their YouTube channel. So there's a lot, and we're, it's 2 hours with these men, and we're going to grill them on the 10-point agenda of the Women's Alliance, which you can also find at the website, and with two great moderators, Cheryl Corley of NPR and Joan Esposito. So,
Nice.
We're very excited. And, actually, both men deserve a lot of examination.
They do.
As all men do.
We'll talk about the mayoral race in just a minute. I want to go a little bit into International Women's Day. We're in a situation where we've accomplished a lot of things and it increased people's rights over the years, and now it's all under fire. I was listening to Democracy Now! This morning, and there was a woman on and gave a very detailed, very rapid history of International Women's Day that talked about its socialist and communist roots, and how it was in 1967 that a group called Chicago Circle, which I don't remember, really put it together. And then later it became, the UN put it through and it became a national day, kind of. Anything you want to share about International Women's Day and the need for people to be aware of the oppression of women more now than perhaps ever?
So I think, I don't remember Chicago Circle, but that was really the moment at which the second wave feminists and feminist socialist movement really emerged. If you remember, that's when we created Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, which that was really fun. And the year later, the Chicago Women's Union. But, this goes back to internationally, Rosa Luxemburg and the women in Germany and Russia, and here to things like the shirtwaist fire, to the struggles of labor women in New York, where hundreds of women were killed in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and to Lowell, Massachusetts, where the song "Bread and Roses" comes from. But for a long time, it's kind of like Martin Luther King. There was a co-optation of International Women's Day, and it became more like everybody sends a greeting for International Women's Day. But it becomes more important than ever with what's going on in the world, and the socialist roots of it, and the and male supremacy and white supremacy that were encoded and caused the women to rebel really need to be examined. And I think in some ways, luckily, or not luckily, finally, those things are. And I know it's been a terrible year. It's been a really terrible year with the Supreme Court decision, terrible year of the killings in Iran. At the same time, women are resisting. I was just reading about women in Iran yesterday. There has been more and more vocal and more visible and more militant activity among women in Iran than anybody else. And we even have, what the Supreme Court did, and which is when they said all the states could ban abortion, was really a catalyst for women's activity. I know everybody said, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," but in fact, it was a wake-up call. And women, as we have for thousands of years, we're not going to just lie down and die.
Right.
Or, as we saw in unlikely places, Tennessee, Kansas, and now DeSantis may have really overstepped the line by saying that he was going to ban all abortions after 6 weeks. Well, Florida is not my favorite state, but I do not believe that the women of Florida, as diverse as they are going to stand for that.
Yeah, we're waiting for some real transformation in what's going on in Florida. I mean, it really has he's been on a roll and it's pretty negative.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I would tell them that these are very scary times. And DeSantis, It goes back to 2010 when our good friends in the White House were focused on Congress. They forgot about the states. And that year, 39 state legislatures became Republicans. And that is a legacy that is killing us today, literally, as well as figuratively.
Well, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Let's just say also in Iraq and particularly in Afghanistan, women are really standing up, and they have some really adverse conditions. And I did learn that in El Salvador, they have banned abortions. So I imagine there's some issues there. We have a big mayoral runoff. And as I pointed out in the opening, only 30% of the people in Chicago eligible to vote turned out for this. We could be getting into a pretty heavy predicament here, depending on who wins. Let's talk about the mayoral race. We have Brandon Johnson, who didn't get over 40% in any ward, versus Paul Vallis, who pretty much failed everywhere he went. What's your take on this runoff election? And if you were a betting woman, which I know you have done a little bit in your life, where are you at on it?
It's funny you should say that because I was ready with bets on the primary, knew that Paul would come in first, partly because of the fragmentation of the Black vote, and partly because, the our friend Chuy Garcia, we've known for years, ran less than a robust campaign.
Yeah, he got in late, and the campaign he didn't have it this time.
Right. So this time, I really don't know. Both candidates have big challenges. On the one hand, Paul has the noose of Catanzara around his neck and the police union.
That's the fraternal order of the police, and the head of that is a Catanzara, who's a Trump supporter and a pretty right-wing guy.
Yeah, totally terrible guy. And on the other hand, Brandon has real challenges too, a lot of his own making. So of the one, I think, what I've heard from people is how does he, well, I'll go to that later. His more taxes and less police is not something that it is a problem for him. Particularly when you look at the voting patterns of the primary, where the voters were older, more conservative, and half the voters, not half, and second after Brandon was Lori. So you have a more conservative, older base. And then both men have this very weird problem. So the two most visible unions in the city are the police and the teachers. And who's ever in City Hall has to negotiate with those unions on behalf of the whole city. And I'm really curious to see what either of them says about, Paul, you've been a consultant to the police union. How would you, as mayor, negotiate with people that you've advised on negotiations? And Brandon, you, who've been an organizer for the union for the last, 30 years, 20 years? How would you separate yourself from the negotiating table where you sat on the other side 2 years ago? So I think that's going to be a challenge for both of them. And I think the play is on the lakefront. I think who gets that vote in 42, 43, 44, 46, 48, as well as who brings out their troops, 49 as well.
Don't forget 49, fighting 49.
Never. But didn't actually Brandon do well in 49?
Brandon did well up here, and Vallis came in second, which really was a surprise. I wanted to ask you, just in passing, I didn't know a lot about Brandon Johnson, and I think he has some making up to do with people around town real fast. I'm wondering if you have any insight or any word you think that we know that Willie Wilson came out for Vallis, but what do you think?
Wait, I didn't know that. Did Willie come out today for Vallis?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm pretty sure. I mean, we could check this after we get off the
Yeah.
air, but in any event, we're wondering what Lori Lightfoot is going to do, if she'll endorse anybody, and if Chewy will endorse anybody. I think it would be a real opportunity for Chewy to push the issues, the progressive issues, and if he did come out for Brandon Johnson and talk it up some, it would be appropriate. Whether he will or not, I don't know. Any thoughts on any of that?
well, I mean, I think there's some animosity, but Chewy is a thorough progressive, but I think there's some bad feeling because Brandon had said that he would never endorse Chewy. So
Whoa, hear that part. Phew.
yeah, so that's a stumbling block. But Chewy is bigger than that. So
Yeah.
It's my prediction that Chewy will eventually support Brandon unless he finds that in his own district that his base won't.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
we'll know more the next week or so. Let me ask
Yeah,
you
well, no.
something that Katie Hogan threw in here when she was helping out with this script. How is this moment like the Harold Washington election? How is it nothing like the Washington movement?
Well, one, as I said to Brandon's no Harold Washington. And in fact, that was after 4 years of a council that was much wider and where power was more concentrated. And people were inspired by Harold. They were on fire.
Yeah, we were.
And he came out of, and they were inspired by their own potential. They were, what really was striking to me in that campaign is once they believed in Harold, was like believing in themselves and they could make the change. I don't see that kind of excitement in this race at all, particularly with 30% of folks voting and the vote split so many ways. And let me say what, as a consultant, as a media consultant to mostly issues, it is harder. If you remember, when we did Harold's campaign, I only had 4 TV stations to deal with.
Right.
No, seriously. And everybody watched the news. And so that, when we were down 13 points in the general, what we did was we bought ads on every station that Sunday night because we knew the entire city of Chicago was watching. And that brought us over the top. I mean, how do you reach people these days? How do you reach young people?
I don't know. My kids don't watch. Once in a while, they'll come in and watch the news. I'm glued to the news all the time.
Right.
And
Right.
they're
They don't
on
watch.
social media. And one of my kids was for Brandon, and one was for Chewy.
Right. I mean,
Well, my other kids, I had other kids for who, my daughter, I think, also went for Brandon too. And
so young people are much more for Brandon, but they're voting this time in lower percentages than ever before. So whether or not Brandon can break through to more young people, whether or not Paul can I'm sure he's going to, and Joe Trippi is no slouch. And, but I don't know how you reach, I mean, whenever I do anything with the media, I use 5 different forms of media for anything. And it's expensive and it's tricky.
Marilyn Katz, before we let you go, any thoughts on the aldermanic races still to be decided? And
Well,
the makeup of the council we had in the 49th,
whatever.
Maria Hadden, just Cruz, Andre Vasquez in 40. We have Andrea Clay in 46 in the lead. In the runoff, we have Lenny Mana Hoppenworth, who was a guest on the show,
So great.
in 48, running against Dunn, who some other people like. What's your take on some of this aldermanic stuff?
I think it's going to be fascinating. Whoever wins the mayoral is going to be facing a council with nearly 20 new alderpersons and at least 14 or 15 who are socialists.
Right.
So, we haven't seen this since Milwaukee in the 1920s.
Right.
So that would be really, really interesting to watch. Now, as Michael, as you and I know, socialism is a very broad term for these folks, but you know, and I don't know if you saw my article last week in Cranes, you know, it is time. I've advocated this for a long time, that the council has its own power, that it becomes like Congress or like the State House, an equal partner in governing the city. So strap in and get ready for the ride.
I couldn't read your article because I couldn't open it. I wasn't subscribed. But anyhow,
I'll send it.
All right,
I'll
we're going to have you back. You know, I love talking to you, Marilyn. I'd like to see you again. One of the things that you and I share is our enthusiasm for physical fitness and body work and that kind of thing. And Katie would never forget me if I didn't mention the gift you brought into women's homes from coast to coast during the pandemic, when people couldn't go to their workout spaces. You, 5 times a week, you ran a Pilates class for over 2 years until you had to take a break to take care of yourself. Katie's just really grateful. I could go on and read the rest of this long paragraph.
And I love them. A whole new community that I adore.
Okay, Marilyn, we'll be talking to you in the next few days, I'm sure.
All right.
Keep up the great work and good luck with your event, Chicago Women Take Action, Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock at the Temple.
And you're invited.
Clark and Washington. Well, you never know. I might show up.
Good.
And I sent you an invite for Friday night, so check it out.
Good.
All right. We'll be right back.